Architecting the Apple Empire, the trillion-dollar blueprint. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the wild journey of a small garage startup that literally wrote the trillion-dollar blueprint. We're talking massive early triumphs, some seriously deep betrayals, and ultimately the greatest comeback story in tech. Let's get right into it. I mean, think about it for a second. How exactly does one tiny garage spawn a trillion-dollar empire? It's kind of hard to wrap your head around now, right? Especially since the very same company that completely rewired how billions of us live, work, and think also stared down one of the most dramatic near collapses in the history of modern business. To really get this roller coaster, we gotta rewind to where it all started. Before the empire, the pre-Apple computer industry. Picture the state of the tech industry before Apple even existed. We're talking massive, clunky, room-sized machines mostly locked away in corporate basements or military bases. The whole idea of a personal computer sitting on your living room desk? Basically science fiction. The market was totally wide open for anyone bold enough to bridge the gap between that hardcore, intimidating engineering and, well, everyday human experience. And that bridge was ultimately built by smashing two very different mindsets together. On one side, you've got Steve Wozniak and his absolute technical genius, just brilliant, unmatched engineering. But as we all know, a great product isn't going to sell itself, right? It had to be paired perfectly with Steve Jobs' unparalleled marketing vision. He somehow knew exactly what consumers wanted long before they even knew they wanted it. It's such a timeless lesson. If you're building a business, you've got to realize that phenomenal tech absolutely needs phenomenal storytelling. The early momentum they had was honestly just staggering. They kicked things off in that humble little garage in 1976. Literally within months, they're physically building the Apple I. And then, fast forward just one single year to 1977, and boom, they are already selling their first batch of computers. It is a total masterclass in rapid prototyping. It shows how sheer willpower can turn a box of raw components into a viable business in absolute record time. But the real game changer here? The launch of the Apple II. They didn't just tweak a few things and build a slightly better machine. No, they focused relentlessly on accessible consumer design. They made it approachable for everyday people, not just hobbyists. The result? Completely explosive market adoption. It proved once and for all that combining groundbreaking tech with truly user-friendly design is the secret sauce to capturing the whole market. Of course, that kind of explosive adoption inevitably leads to one thing: a massive IPO. Going public completely transformed Apple overnight. They went from this scrappy little startup into an absolute powerhouse, flooding the company with an unimaginable influx of capital. We're talking about creating overnight millionaires and totally cementing Apple's place as a heavy-hitting Silicon Valley titan. Everything seemed perfect, until one decision changed everything. Money is flowing in, computers are flying off the shelves. You'd think they had it made, right? But as the company morphed into a massive corporate entity, the internal dynamics really started to shift. You had that original, scrappy garage mentality violently frashing with the new corporate board members. And then, well, one monumental decision changed the entire trajectory of the company. Behind closed doors, it was basically a devastating domino effect. First, intense internal corporate conflicts start bubbling up as the board keeps clashing with the founders. Second, because of all this bitter infighting, their once unified business strategy completely fractures. And finally, step 3, the unthinkable happens. Steve Jobs, the visionary who literally willed the company into existence, is ousted, forced right out of his very own creation. That moment sent absolute shockwaves through Silicon Valley. And it serves as an incredibly harsh lesson for anyone in business about the ruthless reality of corporate governance. Think about it. You can build the entire ship from scratch, but if you don't control the board, you can still be thrown overboard. Just like that. The company was suddenly left in the hands of managers who, quite frankly, just didn't understand the soul of Apple. The fall, poor leadership, and the abyss. Without its visionary compass steering the ship, Apple totally lost its magic. They entered this incredibly dark era defined by poor leadership and just a massive, heartbreaking decline. The new executives were laser-focused on extracting short-term profits rather than pushing the boundaries of innovation, which, you guessed it, completely alienated the loyal audience they had originally worked so hard to captivate. So a perfect storm starts brewing. You take poor leadership decisions, and you combine them with rapidly increasing market competition, like Microsoft aggressively pushing forward and taking over. It created this compounding negative impact that was just brutal to watch. Apple started releasing confusing products, they were charging way too much for them, and day by day, their financial stability was just getting eaten away. The contrast in their strategy before and after is honestly striking. Early Apple, they had a crystal clear, singular focus: just make great, simple computers. But that post-Jobs era became totally defined by a scattered, struggling business strategy. They were pushing out dozens of confusing models with basically zero clear direction. It just goes to show that even an established, cash-rich tech giant can rapidly falter if they lose that unified, visionary strategy. And the financial impact of losing that focus, absolutely devastating. Apple's market share just massively shrank down to a tiny 20 fraction against all those rising industry competitors. I mean, the numbers from that time are terrifying. This once triumphant empire was pushed right to the absolute brink of bankruptcy. We're talking literally months away from closing their doors and turning the lights off forever. Which leaves us right here, staring into the abyss. With millions bleeding out of the company every single month, market share vanishing daily, and no visionary at the helm, how could Apple possibly survive? How does a massive, bloated corporation, teetering on the edge of total financial ruin, turn around and execute what would eventually become the greatest comeback in business history? Well, that is the trillion-dollar question.
All right, let's dive right into this. Today, we're unpacking the absolute anatomy of the greatest corporate comeback in history. We are looking at a complete masterclass in strategy, psychology, and relentless execution, the Apple Empire. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a business student, or honestly, just reading this explainer on an iPhone right now, the mechanics of exactly how this company achieved total global dominance are absolutely fascinating. To really appreciate this wild journey, we have to start by anchoring ourselves in the sheer desperation of Apple's darkest hour. It's so easy to look at their massive glass stores and trillion-dollar valuations today and just assume it was always this way. But it wasn't. Before Steve Jobs returned, they were bleeding cash, pushing out a confusing mess of boring beige boxes, and they were literally 90 days away from the doors closing forever. It was a complete catastrophe. So let's kick things off with Section 1, the visionary returns, and see how Steve Jobs saves Apple. Okay, so Jobs steps back in, and he immediately orchestrates this massive momentum shift to save the company. First, he brings this ruthless focus, instantly slashing dozens of confusing, dead-end projects. Then, in a move that completely shocked the tech world, he secures a $150 million investment from Apple's ultimate arch-rival, Microsoft. That injected some serious lifeblood into the balance sheet. But the third step was really the cultural resurrection. Launching the Think Different campaign didn't just sell computers, it reclaimed Apple's soul and aligned the brand with rebels and visionaries. And you can see that brand differentiation perfectly with the release of the colorful iMac. Back then, computers were just ugly, purely functional beige boxes, right? Well, Jobs completely flipped the script. The iMac was translucent, it was colorful, it was fun. It wasn't just a computer anymore, it was a bold statement. Apple shifted the focus entirely away from gigahertz and megabytes and directly onto aesthetics, emotion, and identity.
But here's the thing. Apple's biggest innovation wasn't a product at all. The real genius was about to shift from colorful plastic shells to invisible webs that capture customer loyalty. They were building a trap, sure, but a beautifully designed trap that you actually wanted to be caught in.
Let's move into Section 2, the digital hub revolution, where they systematically take over the music industry. Look at the stark contrast here. Before the iPod, competitors were pushing out these incredibly fragmented, clunky MP3 players with just terrible interfaces. But Apple realized early on that if you combined sleek, pocket-sized hardware with an unavoidable, highly intuitive software hub like iTunes, you create the ultimate ecosystem lock-in. You didn't just buy a music player, you entered a digital ecosystem, because once your entire music library was trapped in iTunes, switching to a competitor's device wasn't just annoying, it was a massive headache. You were locked in. Billions! That is the staggering number of songs sold on iTunes in those early years. They actually convinced record labels to unbundle the album and sell individual tracks for just 99 cents. It completely revolutionized the financial model of the entire music industry. It was just brilliant business strategy, perfectly merging with consumer behavior, making Apple the undisputed kingmaker of digital media practically overnight.
Now, I want you to really think about the gravity of this statement before we look at the device that changed human behavior forever. They conquered the desk with the Mac and the pocket with the iPod, but they were about to combine everything.
Welcome to Section 3, Reshaping the Technology Industry, otherwise known as the iPhone era. The birth of the iPhone and then the App Store revolution turned Apple from a really successful hardware manufacturer into a global platform economy. That's a massive leap. They weren't just selling you a phone, they built a digital marketplace. By letting third-party developers build apps, Apple basically outsourced its innovation while taking a standard 30% cut of all the revenue. Other businesses literally built their fortunes on Apple's land, and Apple just collected the rent.
And this answers exactly why Apple succeeded in mobile while established giants like BlackBerry and Nokia totally failed. Competitors had this deeply fragmented approach. One company made the hardware, someone else made the operating system, but Apple insisted on total, seamless integration. They built the whole widget. Because they controlled both the hardware and the software, the user experience was incredibly smooth and frictionless. The old giants simply couldn't pivot fast enough to match it.
But right when competitors finally thought they could start catching up to the iPhone's massive lead, Apple just expanded the battlefield in a way nobody saw coming.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Apple ecosystem expansion, or as it's often called, the walled garden. Check out these three distinct hardware lines: the incredible resurgence of the MacBook, the total dominance of the Apple Watch, and the absolute explosion of AirPods. Each one of these became a massive, multi-billion-dollar empire in its own right. I mean, if you spun off AirPods into a standalone company today, it would be larger than a lot of Fortune 500 corporations. But the real magic is how they all talk to each other. Your watch magically unlocks your Mac, your AirPods seamlessly switch from your phone to your computer. It creates a walled garden of unparalleled convenience.
So how does Apple continue making billions every single year, even when we hold on to our old phones a little longer? The secret is right here in the services slice. iCloud storage, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, App Store fees. The services business monetizes the very ecosystem we're all living inside. It is highly predictable, recurring revenue with incredibly high profit margins. Seriously, it's the ultimate evolution of a business model. Let's peek under the hood in Section 5, the psychology of global dominance.
These are the psychological levers that explain exactly why customers are so aggressively loyal and perfectly fine paying premium prices. It's not just a phone, right? It's status signaling. That glowing Apple logo says something about your identity. Combine that with a frictionless user experience where everything just works, careful use of artificial scarcity when new products launch, and some masterful storytelling, you've got consumers who don't just buy a product, they buy into a whole belief system.
Now, while Steve Jobs provided the vision, Tim Cook's mastery of supply chain excellence is the secret, honestly unsexy weapon behind Apple's massive cash piles. Cook orchestrated a hyper-efficient, globally synchronized logistical symphony. By expertly managing inventory, squeezing suppliers for the absolute best prices, and flawlessly executing distribution, Apple maximizes the profit margin on every single device they sell.
And the ultimate result of all that? Over $3 trillion. From staring down bankruptcy, literally 90 days from total collapse, to becoming one of the most valuable companies on the face of the earth. It is an amazing testament to the compounding power of a strong brand, a tight ecosystem, and operational perfection.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 6, 5 powerful business lessons, and get into some actionable takeaways.
Here are the 5 undeniable business lessons any entrepreneur can learn from Apple's relentless playbook. 1. Build an ecosystem. Don't just sell isolated products, make them work together beautifully. 2. Sell the experience and the emotion, not just technical specs. 3. Command premium pricing by aggressively differentiating your brand. 4. Master your operations because a great idea dies without world-class logistics behind it. And 5. Think different. Have the courage to cannibalize your own successful products, just like the iPhone did to the iPod, so you can own the future.
It is incredibly inspiring to realize this entire blueprint for global dominance literally started in a garage with 2 guys named Steve. If you found value in this explainer today, please go ahead and like, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what your biggest takeaway was. But before you go, I want to leave you with this final thought. How can you build a walled garden of undeniable value in your own business that keeps your customers coming back for more?